not completely manually. So that's the idea, that we need to accelerate the pace at which we work. So we have those models embedded in the system which you could use and automate this task. Of course, when you're working on a new language, you may not have a model for that language, but we're trying to use models that are there for related languages, see how they work, and there are other things that you've already worked on, you're aware of. The second module that was supposed to be done in the workshop, but we couldn't because Matra took more time than we expected, is the lexicon module, where you could again build the lexicon, build dictionaries, glossaries, those are multilingual, but the point there is also to automate some of the recurring tasks. For example, if you already have lost data, want to use that for creating the lexicon to a certain extent. There's some existing tools do support that, but our idea is also to take it beyond that support. For example, you could automatically attach audio segments to your dictionaries using, if you have worked on this app. So everything on the same platform. For example, you went to the field, you recorded the data, and then you came back with the data. You have uploaded on the app, and then you have segmented the audio, right? If you have segmented at the word level, you could actually generate the whole of the dictionary almost completely automatically, in the sense that the words will be taken from your glosses, the part of speech categories, etc. The example sentences will come from there, the audio will come from there, right? So that's how it's done. Now, what we'll see and what we're trying to launch today is the third app, which is Atekho, and it's the app which helps you in recording things, right? So that's the first step, when they were launching it at the end, the last one. So the idea behind Atekho is also not just to help you in recording, but to help the community members in recording their own languages, in documenting their own languages, cultures, their own oral traditions, and possibly also their environment and whatever would be of interest, right? So it's not built just for the researchers in that sense, it's also built for the communities. So unlike the other two apps that you saw, so for example, glossing is a feature that will be used by linguists, right? Almost exclusively. All of this is part of our internal project called Bully, where we try and collect data for different languages and different varieties of languages. And that data is what's generally called richly annotated data, which includes recordings, transcriptions, translation, morphological glossing. Generally, you don't get this richly annotated data within the broader field of language technology. So the idea is to have some kind of benchmark data that could be used for testing the systems, but if it's further extended, then that could also be used for building those technologies for the languages. So as you document language, as you build these resources, this could be automatically used for building the models. Right? So that's the whole idea. Okay, so now there are few things that I would like to talk about, and one is crowdsourcing, because the app Atekho is what could be called a crowdsourcing app as well, right? So I'm sure most of you have heard what crowdsourcing is, but these are generally the core principles of traditionally what crowdsourcing has been till now. Right? So we provide, for example, you need to divide. Okay, so at a very primary level, crowdsourcing is getting your work, some kind of task that get done by the crowd. Right now, the name itself suggests a lot of things. So, and it requires that you do things in a certain way. Right? For example, you need to break down your task into doable micro tasks, smaller tasks that could be done by a large, diverse group of people who are not trained in that task. And that's why they're crowd. Then there is you invite the broad participation through public platforms, and there's some incentives involved for doing the work. The incentive could be monetary. Generally, it's monetary. Till now, it has been so. And finally, you aggregate the results that's done by the crowd. So, the popular use cases of crowdsourcing includes data annotation. For example, you have say 1,000 or 10,000 text, and you want it to be marked with sentiment analysis, right? Or maybe marked with what kind of named entity. And with prototypical NLP tasks, as you could say. And also something like translation, and then there is the other kinds of tasks, right? So creating new data, for example, through paraphrasing. These are the things that humans could do and do well, and this was done for collecting the data that could again build automated systems for doing this task. Okay. Then more recently, there have been some efforts at building, some kind of a crowdsourcing infrastructure that could help people in documenting the languages more generally. So there is no, by the way, there is no application for this, was available for this till now. Right? So you had different applications. So there was something which was to help you in recording audio, and there was something which would help you in creating a dictionary, collaborative dictionaries, for example. Maybe probably also writing grammars, right? Or those, this kind of merges two fields, what we call two different methods of building data. So traditionally in language documentation, you would go to the field, you would talk to the community members, you would interact with them while collecting the data, right? So it's a very one-on-one process. Crowdsourcing, on the other hand, is where you don't even know who your contributors are, right? So you just put your task out there, and whosoever is available in the platform, they will do the task. Both of these approaches comes with certain advantages and disadvantages, right? So the first one is of course cost. So crowdsourcing is generally cheaper. You don't have to travel. You don't have to spend money on a lot of other things. It also allows you to scale up your data collection, right? In the sense that you could collect thousands of hours of data within a period of months, depending on how many speakers you are. It will not take even a month. It will take a week for you to collect. If you have sufficient incentives and if you have sufficient speakers, then you could do that at a very fast speed, at a very high scale. But the problem always remains with the quality control. Of course, the problem also remains with the fact that you may not get sufficient speakers for all languages. Now, the idea behind the app is to merge the two approaches, right? So, crowdsourcing, even though it has been implemented till now where you don't know your contributors, doesn't have to be so. So, new methods have been worked out within the broader idea of crowdsourcing, right? So, this is how things have evolved over a period of time. So, initially, or at the most basic level, you have an unknown individual, a worker who is a part of a crowd who will provide you data, right? So you give the task, you design the task, and somebody in the crowd of this individual will give you data. That's the most basic or the first implementation of crowdsourcing. Then over a period of time, uh, more specific groups of individuals began to be roped in, and which gave you the scope for contacting the individuals. So it's still not contacting the individuals beforehand. So this is a situation where you collect the data, and if you want to confirm something from the speakers, then you contact the speakers, right? It gives you a scope. The most traditional crowdsourcing thing will not give you a scope for contacting them at all. You don't have any contact details of your speakers. The next stage is where community works as a collaborator and a stakeholder in your project, right? So you work with them through through an app, but you are in constant touch with your community members. This is where it begins to come closer to the field methods, right? So where you are in touch with the community members. The difference lies here that you are still in touch with a large number of speakers. Right? So the speakers are in contact with you, you are in contact with the speakers, the number of speakers is large, it's not 5 or 10 speakers, but still the scale is of hundreds of speakers. Right? And finally, the idea that we are trying to promote is that of self-documentation, where the community itself takes charge of, say, documenting and data collection and everything, and they're not dependent on researchers to formulate the task for them to do, right? So the task is already, defined by the community themselves. So that's what the app Atekho is trying to implement, right? So that has not been implemented technologically. That's what we're trying to implement through this app. So you'll see this evolution of crowdsourcing platforms, the four stages that I talked about. So AMT, if you know, Amazon Mechanical Turk, that was the traditional crowdsourcing platform where you don't know any of your crowd workers, right? If you've ever used, you would know that you just upload a task on the platform, and whosoever are eligible, they will see the task. You fit the eligibility criteria, for example. So depending on that, whosoever is registered on the platform, they could see the task, they will complete the task. They would probably not know who uploaded the task. You would not know who is doing the task. And for certain kind of tasks, this might be a good design because you're trying to collect anonymous data and things like that, but it may not work for all kinds of tasks. The second uh, platform, which is Common Voice. That was developed by Mozilla, and this was for collecting speech data, essentially. That was community-led speech data. So in this platform, you will see that there is an option to contact people who have contributed data. Right, so that's just a second. Then you have Karya, where you are in touch with your community members directly or indirectly. You have to be in touch with them. So it's not like you upload the task and then somebody is doing. You need to go and work with the community. Also, they emphasize a lot on what's called ethical data collection and collaboration with the community. So there are three existing platforms, major platforms for crowdsourcing. Of course, there are a lot of ethical issues that comes with crowdsourcing, right? So issues of worker exploitation and bias in the data, or how do you take an informed consent? And even if somebody says harmful content, offensive or hateful content, for example, either side of the spectrum. So somebody is creating the task or somebody who is doing it. Right? And there's also this big question about data ownership and community rights in them. Because if you, in the traditional crowdsourcing, if you don't know your speakers, you just cannot talk about community rights and all of those issues. So we're trying to handle those some of those concerns in the app, and the fact that it allows community to do documentation by themselves. Of course, with if needed, wherever needed, there is always this assumption that we'll manage to provide some training to them, we'll work with them. It doesn't mean that you leave them in the lurch and just go ahead and do it. But if it's not needed, then also they should be able to do the documentation task, right? So things like fair compensation, transparent communication, and compensation when you are claiming your joint ownership over the data, right? So that's when the question of compensation arises. In certain instances, anonymizing the data could be considered, and the idea of joint ownership and community participation is what we're trying to emphasize here. And so, as the overall goal of the app, right, Atekho, right? So, we're trying to merge the two uh, methods and two ways of collecting data, very different ways of collecting data purposes. But we're trying to see it's an experiment in that sense. If the two could be merged and the two could come together and work together in some way. Right, so this is what we would call the future of language documentation and data collection for both sides of the spectrum, right? So it has to be collaborative. So NLP data collection, for example, doesn't the speed and the scale could be achieved even when they are being collaborative. Right? So that's try to have a seamless collaboration between the community and the researchers. And this is the process of data collection is something, or the ability to collect data and to document, to have digital archives, for example, that accessibility needs to reach the community. It doesn't need to remain with the researchers or the certain private organizations, right? So it should come to the hands of the community themselves. And it should reach a diverse groups in the sense that not for 5 major languages, not for 10 major languages. Right? So it should be able to reach across the boundaries, across communities, whosoever would like to do. And last point being that it needs to be ethical at all points, at all stages, right? So getting consent for formality is not being ethical at all points, right? So it includes the questions of fair competition, it includes the questions of data privacy wherever it's demanded, right? And it includes the question of overall community well-being, data partnership, or those are the things that needs to be prioritized over the need of collecting huge amounts of data. So those things I think existed uh, in a large measure in the field methods, the way field methods have been conducted, or at least the way Professor Rabi has taught us to conduct. But that was somewhere that's still lacking within the larger field of NLP. Right, so that's how we see it, and I guess